Welcome to week 7. This week we're going to continue the section on social influence, section 3, by talking about how nice people get corrupted. We talked about this a little bit in the context of Phil Zimbardo's study, and we're going to take it from there. Looking at what these videos will cover, we'll start by going over activity feedback from last week. I'm going to show you the results from the anonymous mid-course assessment survey. I'll also give you some brief feedback about online post number 5 and quiz number 5. I haven't finished grading the third reflective writing yet, so I will have those or that feedback for you next week. I will briefly introduce Module 14, and then I will describe Week 7 activities, including a little bit more detail for your proposal outline that you'll be turning in this week. So to start with, Week 6 activity feedback, the anonymous mid-course assessment survey. I'm presenting about 2/3 of the results here. You can find the full responses on Scholar. I basically just compiled all of the responses, basically verbatim, and then put those in a single document, so you can feel free to scan through those and see a little bit more detailed information. Here I just tallied up the most commonly reported responses for each of these. So looking at the most helpful and least helpful parts of the course, there was some pretty general agreement about the most helpful part of the course being these instructional videos, so I am glad they're helpful for you. A number of you also thought that the textbook or the readings were very helpful. A couple of you mentioned really liking the online posts, connecting the content to your own lives. And there were some others that didn't really fit into any other category. Those of you who said that there was not anything helpful in the course, I would encourage you to ask for clarification. And if my response didn't help clarify whatever your question was, definitely let me know. I encourage you to be a pretty self-directed learner here, so if you have a question and I give you a response, it's generally in an attempt to guide you towards the right answer without just giving you the answer. That's part of the critical thinking skills that I hope that you'll gain through this course and through your other courses in college, by kind of giving you a hint. That way you can still find the answer yourself. Some of the things that people thought were least helpful were the quizzes, the reflective writings. A few of you didn't think the instructional videos were as helpful, and there were some others, again, that didn't fit into any of the other categories. And generally, whenever I ask questions like these in mid-course assessments, you tend to see kind of a similar pattern, where for some people, the most helpful thing is the least helpful thing for someone else. So it's kind of a balance, and as long as it's not a 50-50 split, or everybody doesn't think that something is least helpful, I generally will keep similar components going. I will mention that there were certain components of the quizzes that you thought were least helpful, so I'll come back to that in just a second. Things that you wanted to change and wanted to not change. The most common things that you wanted to be different were the group project and the quizzes. And as I mentioned, going back one slide, you also mentioned that the quizzes were least helpful. So there were certain components of the quizzes that you thought were unhelpful and that you wanted to change. But you'll also notice that 7 people said that they liked the quizzes. That even, it might sound weird, one person even said this, it might sound weird, but having a quiz every week is actually good because it makes you keep up with the readings. So as I mentioned, there are specific aspects of the quizzes that we're going to come back to there. And I think I also mentioned you can look at the full document on Scholar, and that also includes your most and least favorite topics, which I didn't include in this presentation here. So as far as the quiz content, I wanted to address that. But first I'll talk a little bit about the group project. The feedback that you gave about the group project, unfortunately this is an online class, and a number of you mentioned that it's difficult to do a group project when you're in an online-only class, and that is certainly true. In a perfect world, I think we would have a face-to-face meeting and you would be able to more easily meet up with your group members. Having said that, I think that having an essentially online group, if you're working on a group project, does mimic to some degree what the real world looks like. In a lot of companies, you'll be interacting with people who are in different offices, in different countries, and so a lot of what you'll be doing is interacting online, whether it's through email or through Skype meetings or telephone conference meetings. My current job actually has a lot of that. So this is a really good way, even though it can be, you can have some kind of growing pains through the process, it can be a good way of learning what some potentially good approaches might be for working on a group project if you are only able to interact online. Specifically, some things that you mentioned were that it's hard to figure out who's going to do what. So it's hard to either delegate tasks or identify what you want to do. It can be hard to communicate with each other, and it can be hard to rely on others for their contributions. And I think all of those are very valid. And those are some of the things that I'm glad you mentioned, because they can be some of the things that you actually grow from the most when you're able to figure those things out while you're working on a project. And most of those can be solved by simply talking to each other and opening up that communication. And some of you mentioned it was hard to communicate on Scholar if you were communicating with the Scholar message boards. So if that isn't working for you, then you could maybe try the group text. Some of you have mentioned using GroupMe. That has been pretty helpful for you. So definitely pursue some other options if what you're doing right now isn't working for you. Some of you also mentioned not feeling prepared, that you don't have a good idea of what's coming up, or that you aren't sure what the timeline is. I do have all of the dates for each of the components of the project listed in the syllabus, so check those out if you'd like a little bit more guideline. At the end of this week's instructional videos, I will go through a little bit more detail of what I would like in the outline, and I think that might help too. Some of you also mentioned that you think it might be difficult to do a research study if you're not actually collecting data. So if you're not actually doing a study and conducting your own research. And to that I would say most of the papers that you will do in grad school, if you're considering going on to grad school, are proposals. So the vast majority of what you do, at least in the first few years, will not be actual research. And it's to get that practice of working through the logic of the storyline in your paper. Writing an introduction section is one of the most challenging sections, and so getting more experience with that, even though, again, you can have some growing pains with it, is actually very helpful. The second thing I wanted to mention for the quizzes. So you said that they were helpful and not helpful, and you wanted them to change and not change. So there was definitely some mixed reviews. So I looked more into the details of what you said you did and didn't like about them. Most of what you said you did like were that they existed, that it was a good check to make sure that you're doing the readings each week and that you can basically understand what the concepts are. Some of the things that you didn't like so much, you thought it was overwhelming to study for cumulative quizzes, to have the smaller assessments be cumulative. You thought that was sometimes kind of tough. If the questions, the multiple choice questions, were worth more than 1 point, sometimes missing one or even a few of the multiple choice questions can have a bigger impact on your overall grade. That you wanted quicker feedback for the multiple choice questions, and that you thought that the syllabus questions and assessments in the quizzes wasn't necessary. And I thought that the feedback that you gave is excellent. And for all of these responses, I will say I very much appreciate your feedback. And as I mentioned in week 1, I definitely value your input. And typically in every class, I make some kind of change so that it better addresses your needs. So as far as the quizzes go, for this current week, I've already made some quiz changes. I did make this quiz not cumulative. So I will still keep exams cumulative because it's important to continually review material, because that definitely helps you remember it in the long term and not just, in the 3 months that you're taking this class. I will also make sure that each multiple choice question is only worth 1 point. So if you miss one question, you will only miss 1 point rather than missing 2 points and getting down to B, for example, if there were only 5 questions on a 10-point quiz. Some of you also mentioned wanting to have more clear or specific questions, and I sort of addressed this last week when I was talking about having vague discussion prompts, and that this essentially has external validity. So the kinds of assessments that you'll be doing, the kind of thinking that you'll have to be doing once you graduate college, will be a challenge at sometimes. And so if you can work through that process now and think through Here are 2 answers that might be true, but what might make one of these 2 answers a better answer? That's a good thought process to be able to work through. As far as the syllabus questions and assessments, usually every semester students will forget some aspect from the syllabus and will ask me multiple questions about information that they could find on the syllabus. And by including the syllabus in assessments, you're continually reviewing its content, which is important. There are a lot of important parts in there. And as a class, I will say, having had the syllabus questions in the assessments, you are more prepared than any other class has been. I have not gotten any questions about anything on the syllabus this entire semester so far, with the exception of maybe the first week. So although it may seem silly to you, it's actually very beneficial because you are much more prepared. And you're even asking for more information about deadlines and more information about assignments, which I appreciate because it means that you are being proactive. As far as the speed of feedback, here's where option 1 and option 2 come up. Because this class is online, it can be difficult to administer assessments while still minimizing the potential for academic dishonesty. So there's 2 options that I have created. The first is option 1, keep things like it currently is. So I'm going to call that the status quo. So you can still take the quiz 2 times. Correct responses don't show up until the date that the exam closes or the quiz closes. Questions will be the same for each administration. So if you go in and you start taking the quiz and then all of a sudden your internet connection drops out and you have to retake it, the questions would be the same. So that means that you wouldn't have to essentially take another set of questions for the quiz. And another benefit for me is that I would be able to go into the statistics that Scholar calculates to understand if a particular question is bad. And that way I can account for those missed points, whether it's, if everybody misses that question, if it's just a terrible question, I can give everybody a blanket point, or if like 25 or 30% of students miss that question, I can give them the opportunity for some extra credit there. So that's option 1. The status quo. Option 2 is to have the same number of questions worth the same amount of points, so they'd each be worth 1 point if they're a multiple choice question, but they'd be random questions. So one administration would not necessarily be the same as the next. So if you retake it, basically you'd be taking the same number of different questions. But you'd be able to see more information for each of those questions immediately after taking the quiz. I'm not comfortable saying letting you know immediately which of the responses of the 4 responses is correct, but I am comfortable having some indication of questions, which question responses are incorrect, so that that way you go back to the reading, review it again, and you're able to find the answer for yourself. Finding the answer for yourself is very important to me. So those are the 2 options for quizzes. I have created a single question survey on Scholar, where you can just indicate your preference for quiz option 1 or quiz option 2. So definitely fill that out before Sunday at midnight. Some quick feedback for the reflective writings before I start the next video. Some of you mentioned not liking APA formatting, and I would actually agree with you. Some of you mentioned you think it sounds like I am in love with APA formatting, and there are definitely some benefits to it because it makes everything consistent from paper to paper. But even I would say that at some times APA formatting can be obnoxious, even for those who are going to use it regularly or do use it regularly. It's many people's least favorite part of psychology, but it is one of the most important. And even for those of you who aren't going into grad school, the skills that you'll gain, like the attention to detail and following instructions, no matter what, will serve you very well in the workforce. So think about it that way, that even if you're not going to necessarily need to know how to cite a particular author in an academic paper, there's still going to be a lot of benefit for you. And if you format something incorrectly, whatever it is, your supervisor will make you redo it. So being able to do it right the first time is great. So I will end here and then continue with video 2, a quick wrap up talking about some of the responses from the mid-course assessment.